This is a video about the emotion of shame, a really quite unenjoyable emotion. Now, shame is not often talked about, and you don't tend to find it in children's books because it's actually quite a difficult emotion to describe and to understand, but its effects can be really quite powerful. You see, shame is the feeling we get when we make a mistake, or we get something wrong, or we do something not as well as we think we should have done it, or somebody laughs at us unkindly, or somebody makes a negative remark about us or something we've done, and we're quick to assume that these things mean that we're being judged as completely rubbish, and then the shame might make us start to think we are actually completely rubbish. You see, shame can make some people feel really quite bad about themselves. An example of a time when you could feel shame is when you put your hand up in class and say a really stupid answer to the teacher's question. Even though all you've done is make a mistake, and this in reality is really not a big deal, you assume that the audience of the class that heard you give that answer is thinking that you must be really stupid. The feeling of shame makes you start judging yourself really harshly and deciding yourself that you must actually be stupid. Also, if someone did actually laugh at your answer, this could make you feel even more shame. The emotion of shame is linked to how good a person feels about themselves. In other words, how much self-esteem they have. People with low self-esteem feel the effects of shame more strongly than those with high self-esteem. If you don't have a very good opinion of yourself, when something happens that doesn't make you feel good about yourself, you will quickly use the situation as proof for the negative thoughts you already have about yourself. Those negative thoughts, in turn, will trigger more shame, and that shame will make you feel like you're even more rubbish. Can you see how someone with low self-esteem would react to a potentially shaming situation differently from someone with high self-esteem? Shame can arrive really quickly and make us feel very uncomfortable. It's like the opposite of how we feel when we get approval or we enjoy praise. When we feel shame, we can suddenly feel a mixture of being really self-conscious, like we've been a bit rejected by others, like we've really failed and that we're no good at anything. We can feel a bit embarrassed. Sometimes we feel frustration at ourselves for having got something wrong, and sometimes we feel anger or irritation at others for the reaction that we have assumed they are having. Because shame can be such a powerful emotion, we can have quite quick and strong reactions to feeling it. So let's take a look at some of those reactions. How might you react to shame? Well, you might freeze, look down, or sort of try to shrink in a way to make yourself less noticeable. You might feel like you want to hide. You can feel a bit tense or a bit panicky. You probably won't want to continue with whatever it was you were doing. You can feel suddenly and strongly like you want other people to stop noticing you. You can feel quite bothered and agitated, feel like you're rubbish. You can end up kicking yourself, which means blaming yourself in a severe way, full of regret. You might feel like you have instantly lost confidence. You might get defensive, which is fighting back or overreacting to those that you think triggered your shame. Shame can make us doubt ourselves and what we can do, and we can feel really disappointed in ourselves. You can see why shame is really not an enjoyable emotion. The kind of things that trigger shame include anything that backs up any negative thoughts we might already hold about ourselves. Thoughts like thinking we're no good at something or anything, thoughts where we assume everybody else is better than us, or anything that quickly stops us from feeling good about ourselves. So what kind of things can trigger shame? Well, the triggers for shame can include making mistakes, getting something wrong, not doing something as well as we wish we had, especially if we're a perfectionist, someone criticising us, someone insulting us, especially if we let ourselves believe that the insult is true, someone pointing out an error we've made, getting told off, someone falling out with us, something that we believe made us look stupid, silly or foolish in front of other people, being known for being good at something but then turning out not to be as good as we thought, and situations where we don't look like we want to look in front of other people. There are other emotions that are quite similar to shame, so let's take a look at these and the ways in which they're different. So, feelings closely linked to shame include feeling ashamed. That's when we feel bad about something that we've done because we think it was wrong. Feeling ashamed doesn't involve others' opinions directly. It's more about how we ourselves feel about what we did. Another emotion similar to shame is feeling guilty, which is quite like ashamed. We feel guilty about something we've decided ourselves is wrong because of our own individual ideas about what is right and what is wrong, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And lastly, another emotion that's a bit similar to shame is embarrassed. When we feel shame, we can feel embarrassed too, but feeling embarrassed is when we feel really self-conscious and like everyone is looking and laughing at us for something silly we've done. Embarrassment does not necessarily make us feel really bad about ourselves, just awkward and uncomfortable. Shame, though, is all about us assuming others think we are rubbish or useless and the strong feelings that can trigger. To understand shame more, it can help us think about why we evolved it or why humans needed it to help them survive. You see, many years ago, when we lived in tribes or large groups of people, our survival depended on not being kicked out of that tribe. We needed our tribe for protection and for help. So shame was useful because it did actually teach us how to behave in ways that was acceptable to other people, in ways that got approval. And these behaviours therefore made it much less likely that we'd be kicked out of our tribe. Let me explain how shame did this. When we were a young child, it was up to the adults in our lives to teach us which behaviours were acceptable and which were not. When we did something acceptable, positive or good, we got approval or praise from those adults. But when we did something unacceptable, negative or bad, we got told off or received disapproval in some way. This telling off would trigger shame, which is an uncomfortable enough feeling to make us not want to do whatever it was we did again. Shame worked like an extra telling off on the inside from ourselves and helped us learn to behave in ways that other people would approve of. Shame needed to be uncomfortable for it to work properly. However, when we had adults that made us feel loved, we could cope with this shame because even after a telling off, we still felt loved, supported and overall approved of. Sometimes though, we can be shamed and not feel loved and supported, and this is when it can feel really unenjoyable. Different people are affected by shame differently. Some people feel it really strongly, others feel it less. As I said before, it usually boils down to how good we feel about ourselves, or in other words, how much self-esteem we have. When people feel shame strongly, it can jolt them into becoming defensive. Being defensive is when someone tries too hard to protect or defend themselves. It's like someone has put up a shield to protect themselves and pulled out their sword to attack whoever triggered their shame. Being defensive can often seem like an overreaction to what happened. Being defensive can include insulting people or being aggressive towards others. Being defensive is usually a quick, impulsive response that has not been thought through at all, and it usually makes situations worse and can make the person who had just been defensive feel even more shame for having overreacted. So let's take a look at an example of a situation where shame has been triggered in someone. Imagine a boy called Tom has been boasting about what a fast runner he was in the week leading up to sports day and how he would definitely win all of his races. He believed himself to be the best runner in the class. However, when sports day did finally come, he came 5th in his first race. This could trigger shame in Tom. He could feel foolish for having boasted. He might feel embarrassed for not winning. He will assume that everyone else is finding it funny or ridiculous that after all that boasting, he didn't win his race. The shame he might feel will affect his thinking, and he might start to give himself a hard time for not having won the race. He might tell himself he was rubbish for not winning. The embarrassment part of shame would probably make him want to hide away so he didn't have to hear anyone say what he was thinking about himself, or have people notice him, because when they noticed him, he would assume that they were thinking about the fact that he did not win the race. Tom probably felt really disappointed in himself for not being as fast as he liked to think he was. If he heard someone laugh at him, he might become defensive and tell them to shut up and say that they were stupid. In reality, some people might have been pleased that he didn't win because he had been boasting so much, but most people would not have thought about it as much as Tom had done himself. Most people really didn't care whether Tom won his race or not. So what can we do to cope with shame? Well, it is a tricky emotion, but we can learn to manage and cope with it well. The first thing to do is become aware that you are feeling shame when you're feeling it. Because shame is not a feeling that is talked about as often as feelings like being happy, sad, scared or angry, we don't tend to even think about it. So try and make sure you understand what it is and when it is likely to be triggered, so you can become more aware of it when it turns up. Try to get to the point of really noticing the first flush of shame when it happens. Next, when you feel shame, ask yourself what assumptions you're making. Are you assuming everyone thinks you're stupid? Are you assuming everyone is laughing at you? Are you assuming others noticed and are thinking about what happened more than they are likely to be? Are you assuming everyone will remember this forever? Challenge any assumptions you've made. Even if one person noticed and maybe laughed, it won't mean that everyone will have done. Next, ask yourself what unhelpful thoughts you're having. Are you thinking, it's important not to make mistakes? Only stupid people make mistakes. Are you thinking what happened was more of a disaster than it was? Are you thinking people will like or respect you less because of whatever happened? If someone triggered shame by criticising or insulting you, do you think their opinion is the only opinion that counts? Are you thinking you could never be forgiven for whatever happened if you made a mistake or got something wrong? Are you thinking you're rubbish? Because you're not. All of these assumptions and thoughts need to be challenged. To help you, remember the following things the next time something happens that triggers shame. 1. The person who will think about what happened the most will be you. Other people will either give it no thought or will forget what happened really quickly. If someone has shared an opinion about you or something you've done that triggered shame, it doesn't mean it's true. 3. People won't make a final judgment about you based on one mistake or one thing that happened. 4. Your friends still think good things about you based on other things you've done. 5. If you admit you feel silly or foolish about a mistake you made, people are likely to reassure you or forgive you quickly, if that's what you need. And now I'm going to say more about shame that's a little more tricky to understand. Even though shame is really unenjoyable, it can be useful in teaching us about ourselves. Each time shame is triggered, it can give us a clue about what we are sensitive about or what negative thoughts or beliefs we have about ourselves. When shame is triggered, it's often because it has given us an unhelpful message that the negative thought or belief we have about ourselves must be true. If you think hard about why the shame was triggered, you can often work out what underlying thought or belief the shame was linked to. For example, if you were laughed at for getting something wrong in maths and felt shame, your underlying thought could be that you're useless at maths. It's important to say that these underlying thoughts nearly always turn out not to be true, and even if they do have some truth to them, say for example, you're not very good at maths, these thoughts are never helpful. If you look for evidence that proves your negative thought is not true, chances are you'll find it. So for example, if you have the negative thought that nobody liked you, or you're a hard person to like, I bet you could create a list of lots of people that do like you. Finding evidence that proves the negative thoughts that you have about yourself are wrong is a good thing to do and will boost your self-esteem and reduce the effect that shame has on you. Also, don't be hard on yourself. Nobody can be brilliant at everything and everyone makes mistakes. It takes some practice, but try to swap any negative thoughts when you catch them for positive ones. So what have we learnt? Well, we've learnt that shame is an unenjoyable emotion that's triggered by anything that we believe made us look rubbish. We've learnt that different people are affected by shame differently, depending on their self-esteem. We've learnt that when shame is triggered, it's usually a bigger deal for the person who's feeling the shame than anybody else. And we've learnt that becoming aware of shame can teach us a lot about ourselves.